Hello, this is Rob Seaman, and you are listening to Whole Earth Radio. Today is season 3, episode 3. My guest is Corinna Bellizzi, who is joining the podcast for the second time with me today on Earth Day, which is a phenomenal celebration of everything important to the environment and the planet, which is a real through line through, I think, your career, Corinna, and your life. And thank you for being on Whole Earth Radio.
Well, it feels appropriate to be here talking about what I'm doing to help the earth today. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And I know last time we talked a lot about Care More, Be Better, which is your podcast in which you've had so many great environmentalists and scientists and activists and talked about environmental justice and social justice and lots of different aspects of the movement to make the world better. But today we want to focus on ORLO Nutrition, which is the microalgae nutrition company that you have worked with now for, it's been a few years.
A hot minute, about 4 years now, four and a
About
half
4 years.
years. But if that was pre-market, as we were getting the parent company, Vaxa Technologies, really ready for the launch of a brand. So we had to create the brand from scratch. We had to look at how we were going to integrate the nutrients that the company offered, how we would formulate with them, who we would use as our contract manufacturers to encapsulate something like a soft gel, because those things are generally not in-house. So we really had to run through the gamut of all that product development space and enter the market in May of 2022, with a soft launch and then with a full production launch a little later that year. So we've been in the market for a few years now, and we're making pretty incredible impact. 110 fish not fished for every 1 month supply of Orlo's omegas that we put into the world. So that's very direct in its application. So we're real proud of that. And in addition, just being able to show that we can utilize today's energy, like green energy, to grow nutrition sources as opposed to borrowing from the past with oils or sugars and things along those that end up being used.
Yeah, I had last season Isaac Berzin, Professor Isaac Berzin, who is the founder of Vaxa and Orlo Nutrition and a real innovative scientist in microalgae. Folks can reference that conversation. I'll put a link to that, of course. But I want to reference your, early career in omegas in the industry, because you've worked with many groundbreaking companies and helped them reach heights of economic success in the omega space. So when this isn't your first rodeo, as we like to say, but the first time around, the company that you really took to the top was a fish oil company. So
Yeah.
do you feel comfortable talking about that in this space? And
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is really what got me to want to dive into the algae space initially. I worked for almost a decade for Nordic Naturals as essentially their second in command. I led sales, marketing, and education, and everything that faced consumers and retailers, which was over 70% of the business, as well as leading their international development and much of what they did in the professional market through doctors, doing things like working with Joe Maroon, who is a team neurologist and neurosurgeon for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and
yeah.
collaborating with him to bring our message to a different audience and gaining the ability to market our oils to the NFL through that partnership and some other things that we did together. So it was really an incredible proving ground for not only my capabilities of bringing a product to market, but of being able to touch all these different portions of what makes a business able to succeed. And so, what really drew me to the algae space was the knowledge that there was no future that could truly be sustainable for wild fishing, at least with the way our environments are presently managed. And that is not only because of rampant overfishing or pirate fishing, piracy. There's an entire documentary film about this called Seaspiracy, which is out on Netflix if people really want to know more. Word of caution, it can be difficult to watch at times, especially if you have a love of marine mammals. There are some scenes in there that I wish in a way I could unwatch. But it really does go to show you that there's just more at play than any of us can really control. That things like the MSC certification for Marine Stewardship Council for sustainable fish, that they don't do anything to patrol or control what's actually happening in these waters. At the same time that you have these activities happening, you also have the warming of our oceans. Our oceans are getting warmer every year, and they're getting warmer not only because of global warming, but because of the CO2 that the ocean is absorbing. And with each little bit of CO2 that the ocean absorbs, it is becoming more acidic. And with that rise in acidity, it generally has a rise in temperature as well. They're paired together. So we end up in this perfect storm of environmental factors that are heating our oceans. And ultimately, at some point in the next 30 years, we could get to a point where our oceans are no longer, at least broad swaths of them, life supporting, which could be a terrible, terrible thing for any of us. And I don't want to be the ultimate doomsdayer here, but when you see that far into the future, that's like, well, do I really want to support fish oil forever? So the answer became no. And I started working more on the algae side of things.
Well, that's a great point. We don't want to be, I think that's a road that you have to walk in environmentalism, which, one of the ways that we can motivate people to action, which is the fear of consequences or just looking at the real world impacts. And I guess the movement has been criticized sometimes for using a fear factor, but I think it's a realistic perspective. And, when you look at proposing a solution, for example, as opposed to just saying this bad thing is happening, what are we going to do about it? You're actually giving people a way to make things better. You're giving them, a way that they can act, a product choice that they can make. In fact, many different product choices they can make, many consumer and individual choices they can make on a daily basis that'll make an impact. And it reminds me of the paper that Dr. Berzin wrote that he was talking about cutting out the middle fish.
Yep.
And I think this is a great idea where, a lot of times consumers, it occurs to me that they act more on the what's in it for me as opposed to the what's in it for the planet, right?
Mm.
And so when you look at microalgae, particularly with the omega microalgae, as well as the, ultimate spirulina, Icelandic ultra spirulina, there is this idea that you're doing something good for the planet, but you're really doing something good for yourself. I mean, so do you think that maybe makes this a really viable a proposition for anyone, not just for environmentalists and not just for vegans or not just for any one group?
Well, I think it is. We know that, first of all, fish get their omega-3s, EPA, and DHA from the algae they consume. So that's the concept behind cutting out the middle fish, right? We also know that algae give us oxygen. All these algae species, from the microalgae to the macroalgae, like seaweeds and kelps that are growing in our oceans, they create oxygen that we breathe. So if we start instead focusing on these nutrients, which come from the algae directly, that can be either farmed in open ponds using sunlight or the way we grow them at VAXA in a controlled environment, so you don't have to worry about pollution or toxins and things along those lines. And at the same time, that can use today's energy using geothermal energy while sequestering carbon. So you're bringing down, you're locking in carbon to this terrestrial plane and offering something that's consumable, that provides health benefit, and that at the same time is in a more bioavailable form. I mean, why wouldn't you do it if that were the case? That being said, I just had a conversation last week with Ben Kelly, who I brought on my podcast, Care More Be Better, to talk about sustainability specifically as it relates to sourcing of ingredients. He's actually the person who was co-founder of Algorithm, that created really great DHA oil strains that they then remarketed to the marketplace. In fact, we partnered with Algorithm in our initial launch to go ahead and use their DHA, because we didn't grow DHA for Orlo. We grow EPA, and an EPA producing algae strain. We put these things together in a soft gel and we can make custom formulas. They're both coming from a today's energy perspective. They're coming from algae as opposed to going to the sea, which is really a phenomenal way to look at your overall nutrition. especially when you can sequester the carbon and when your byproducts are not negative to the environment. In our case, a lot of those byproducts are more like co-products. They exist within the soft shell. We're giving you proteins, there's chlorophyll, other micronutrients like vitamin A. There is a complete style of nutrition with algae as it exists. These are billions of years old organisms, the first life on planet Earth that could be part of the solution of the climate perils that we presently find ourselves in. So I really think more people should be looking to algae instead of fish oil per se.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, we're going to be forced to, because overall, algae is about 5% of the consumer marketplace when it comes to omega-3s, 95% being fish oil, or I mean, even like things like shark liver oil and whatnot, right? So there's some ingredients that not everybody is necessarily going to jump to, but they're
Right.
out there. There's sources of omega-3s. And that part of the market has been flat from a supply perspective for at least a decade at this point, meaning that there's just not more being produced because there's not more fish that are being able to be drawn out of the ocean each year. So people are getting really creative, like what are more sustainable sources? And one that's interesting on the plant-based side is like this acai flour, which is
Mhm.
got omega-3 alpha linolenic acid. But for all the nutrition nerds out there, you're not going to get total omega-3s in your cells up unless you're consuming direct sources of EPA, DHA. So you might use an acai flour specifically for something like getting your healthy overall alpha linolenic acid levels up, like a flax oil or a chia seed, something to that effect. But you're going to need a direct source of EPA and DHA if you want to see dramatic health impacts for your brain, for your eyes, for your heart, for your circulatory system, for your mood, for your joints, all of those things.
Well, it's such a great point because I remember in the industry, from the period where I came into the natural products industry in the mid 90s somewhere, to really, I want to say early 2000s, even, in some corners, maybe even today, there was this idea that flax oil was a viable source of omega 3s. And that it really speaks to people not understanding the different forms, the long chain versus the short chain, what's usable. And, you with Nordic Naturals were able to successfully educate the marketplace that it's not just omega-3, that's the buzzword, but EPA and DHA are the specific forms of omega-3 fats that you need, that
Mhm.
your body will ultimately require. These are essential forms. And so I think the fact that you're able to create these with a plant, with algae, kind of circles back to what people thought they were getting in the earlier days of the industry. And it's interesting. I think at some point, we were able to convince people, look, you really do need DHA, you really do need EPA, but it's an interesting consumer circle, I think, of information to where people, realize that they need these nutrients, but they're you feel like people are just now getting the message that there is EPA and DHA that is plant-based and that's a viable option.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because all those vegetarians, vegans that were hard to convert to fish oil in the past, some of them still have this mindset of, no, no, I'm just fine with flax oil. I've even heard the comment coming through from some vegetarian circles that they don't see algae as being a vegetarian or vegan product. And I'm like, wait a minute, why? What's going on here? Why do they think it's not a plant? And this comes from a misunderstanding from the cyanobacteria perspective. Spirulina, as an example, is a cyanobacteria, right? That said, so it acts very much in certain ways like a bacteria, but it is photosynthetic and it's like a plant nutrient, right? It's not a multicellular organism the way we might can think of other things. So they're they are literally thinking of spirulina and other cyanobacteria when they're saying that. They don't understand that nanochloropsis is literally a single-celled little, it's like its own chloroplast floating around in the water, right? And so we have algae strains that are grown specifically for omegas, from the Schizochytrium to the Nanochloropsis that we grow. producing nutrients like EPA and DHA. Um, each fish in the ocean that accumulates these levels of EPA and DHA, they're either accumulating it specifically because they eat the algae, like the smaller bodied fish, sardines and anchovies, or they're accumulating it from being predatorial fish and eating smaller fish that eat the algae and all that, right? So you're still getting the EPA and the DHA, the original life force from microalgae, no matter what you do. And even the plants that ended up on our shores, the flax that's growing, and all the other plants in the that entire plant kingdom, they started out at one point 3.5 billion years ago as an algae. So it really is the center of the creation of life.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I just wanted to pivot a little bit here to talk about the spirulina. Part of the reason, we're here to talk about how important your spirulina is, how Orlo's spirulina is so much different, where it's grown in Iceland certainly has this wonderful, environmental footprint, which is, smaller than just about anything else, but also the vertical integration, right? Like the closed systems that spirulina is grown in there. And I guess that would apply to all the microalgae that Voxa Orlo is growing, right? So you could talk about maybe the difference between algae, right? So if someone is buying an algae, spirulina or any other kind of nanochloropsis or whatever it is, that's grown in an open tank. I mean, we literally are talking about tanks that are open to the environment in terms of pollution and things falling in and decaying organic matter falling.
Oh, I feel like Isaac probably talked about this a bit already, but you literally have incidences where you have documented like seagulls, fly over, and guess what birds do when they're in mid-flight? They still poop, right? I think I've been on a campus at school where there were a bunch of seagulls that would just like erupt every time there was a lunch break, right? From all the tops of not mountains, or just the buildings and things. And so you'd be like duck and cover, almost want an umbrella just to get through the quad without getting targeted, it seemed. So yes, that falls into these open ponds. Some of these open ponds could be the size of multiple football fields, and essentially just have the water circulating slowly through to ensure that the algae itself doesn't get burned, because the UV light itself can actually burn the spirulina. The same thing happens when you're growing algae strains that are photosynthetic that produce omega-3s. You need to have a certain amount of oscillation so that they can cycle through the top of the water and get enough light, but also not get burned, and get, their temperature needs met, because if they get too hot or they get too cold, then things can go wrong, right? They just simply won't replicate, or they will die. And so, the primary growers for spirulinas have continually battled certain issues with environmental toxins. Like, you'll produce a spirulina and you'll find that it has higher levels of heavy metals, and lead in particular, than you'd like to see. And particularly if you're going to sell your product in the state of California, because California has this beautiful thing called California Prop 65, which is designed to protect consumers from high levels of lead in certain things, or PCBs, other environmental contaminants. So you don't want to have high levels of these things in consumables, especially those consumables that are considered, let's just say, superfluous. Like, it's not a core food. You won't see a steak of salmon with a label on it that says violation of California Prop 65, but you'll see that pancake mix that has, a higher level will bear a warning if it has a certain level of lead, saying things like, the state of California knows that the levels of toxins in this product may contribute to birth defects and things along these lines, or cancers. So it's a real challenge, and has been a real challenge for some time. In fact, for a long time, you couldn't find a greens bar because people were getting litigated against for having high levels of lead in a simple greens bar that had spirulina in it. If you buy a pouch of AG1 and you live in California and it ships to your door, you're going to see that California Prop 65 warning on it. And this is because of the spirulina source. Now, we grow our spirulina indoors in these vertical tubes, exposing it only to the light that it needs to thrive, which is a perfect mix of blue and red. No UV, it doesn't burn, right? We're able to moderate its temperature because it's a fully controlled environment. If it's too hot outside, doesn't matter. Too cold outside, doesn't matter. Guess what? We're in Iceland. It's too cold a lot of the time, but it doesn't affect our indoor growing conditions. And this does a couple of things for the algae itself. One is it seems that it actually produces higher potency of core nutrients and in their more bioavailable form. In the case of our spirulina, we've identified that it produces vitamin B12 in the methylcobalamin form. If you're to look at spirulina grown in open ponds, it produces a B12 agonist. It's like a pseudo B12, which is ultimately will sit on your receptors in your cells and prevent absorption of B12. Vegans and vegetarians are concerned about getting enough B12. So, you can take our spirulina, and maybe not anybody else's, but you can take our spirulina as a solid source of vitamin B12. And that's why you'll see B12 reflected in our women's vitality mix, in our brain performance bars, and even in our gummies, that our focus and memory gummies. These three products and our immunity boost, they all bear B12, which is coming from the spirulina itself.
And also iron as well, right? Among these nutrients,
Yeah,
which is
iron, we
relevant.
quantify the iron and the B12. And if we include enough of the nutrient, meaning that it bears more than 20% of the recommended daily intake on that particular product, as long as we're crossing that threshold, then we're also claiming it on the label and supplement facts. I'm so sorry, my dogs are telling me a package is here.
It's all good. It's the ultimate doorbell. Got the dog ring.
I do. I have the dog ring for sure.
But yeah, I think that's like with the women's vitality powder, that mix is, to me, making great use of the natural nutrient profile in your spirulina, in Orlo spirulina, to find a unique formulary use, I would say, right? As opposed to just giving people just spirulina. Here's this amazing spirulina. And I think, to me, it looks like the way that Orlo has been formulated, the products, this first and second wave of products is very current, very modern, in terms of reaching a new generation of consumers, as opposed to the people, the folks who taking spirulina for years, right? 20, 30 years ago, people were kind of closing their eyes and holding their nose and eating this stuff that tastes terrible. And they're not used to products that actually taste good made with microalgae.
That's been the barrier. That's been the barrier
Right.
to the mainstreaming of them because people think of it as pond scum or something like that. And when you grow your spirulina or you grow your algae in these really controlled environments using this beautiful fuchsia light that's a perfect blend of the blue and the red, when you physically open the doors of your plant to bring people inside and they remark, oh my God, it doesn't smell like anything in here. And they can taste the spirulina directly out of our tank, just filtered through a mesh, that it doesn't have any flavor at all, aside from a mild salinity that it gets washed for because we have to grow it in a somewhat salty water. It's like a brackish sort of water, right? For its optimal growth. And at the end of the day, you produce something that has literally no aftertaste or flavor. I have actually the women's vitality mix right here in a jar.
Oh,
But
nice.
what I want to say before we get to that is that the way we're growing, the fact that we're able to get all the essential amino acids are in the spirulina itself, the fact that it only has to be very minimally processed, that we don't have to worry about toxins or environmental contaminants or, hey, a dead lizard in your pond or whatever. We don't have to worry about any of that at all. We can produce something that just is very, very clean to the palate, can be minimally flavored, can be flavorless. I've actually seen out of our production, a liquid blue that they were just testing, like, here's a 7% aqueous extract, mix it with whatever in your kitchen and tell me what you think. So I've done things like put it in my smoothies, put it in my frosting, put it in my yogurt, and it literally just makes food blue, which is fun. And the kids love it, and it hasn't had any negative impact, right? We're now to a point where we're offering our spirulina as an ingredient to a bread company in Iceland called Broad & Co. They're putting just 30 milligrams of the powder per equivalent serving of the bread, and gives 20% of the daily value for B12. It gives iron and all this other stuff, and it tastes delicious. It's not, you don't taste a difference. It's just whatever the formula of your bread is how it tastes. So the fact that we can do this and there's no organoleptic negativity, meaning it doesn't taste or look bad, is really incredible. So in this formula, I've got this little jar here. I brought it to kind of demo for anybody that is watching this on YouTube. Got my like trusty dusty water bottle here. But when it's fully water soluble. So if I just pour this in, you see that the blue starts up right away, right?
Yeah.
And it's a blue-green algae. And this hasn't even been mixed yet. And so instead of using a shaker ball, because that would be very loud, I brought my little mixer.
I love that.
But I mean,
Yeah,
okay,
very vibrant color.
you shake it, it's like a blue beer almost, right? And in fact, we've tested this. You can take our blue algae and put it in a beer, and you can make a green beer if you're using a lager for.
There you go.
It's just a nod to the future, because we are going to be doing a blue essence product that will be offered, and a little liquid dropper that you can add to anything you want to flavor or taste, or make blue frosting if you want for your kid's birthday. It makes for an interesting yogurt, popsicle, smoothie, whatever, just because you're able to show people a nice color. It's also been used in things like cocktails, make it a little healthier, give yourself some B12 with it. Maybe that will help prevent the next day's hangover.
Right? So many applications there, right?
Right.
So often those plant pigments are what a lot of the antioxidant and phytonutrient value in plants, wherever they come from, whatever gives it that color is so often what has the most antioxidant activity, right? It's true in berries, seems to be true here, to some extent with chlorophyll and phycocyanin in the algae.
Oh, for sure. And the other thing to think through on the very tail end, especially as this is coming through on Earth Day, is that our waste at the end of the day, after you've extracted what you want, and what's left behind is essentially soil amendment that will lock the carbon with some core nutrients into the ground for the next 30 years, that essentially supports the growth of plants for food or for whatever else. And so this is part of the reason that we actually have carbon credits to sell. So you could really confidently say that ORLO Nutrition and VAXA Technologies are carbon negative companies.
Well, and I think that's a great point. I think when you have the intersection, here we are on Earth Day talking about sustainability, but also, the point I always try to make with these things, we're not asking people to sacrifice. We're actually giving them additional benefits. So, you're doing something that's good for you. It's good for the environment. Those two things together, are enough to win a lot of people over, but we're all about convenience these days. So I think the things that I see that ORLO is doing to make more convenient to consumer products, like on the Women's Vitality, the stick packs.
Yeah, I've got that right here. This is the first production run, but it's really beautiful. We got this holographic, and the stick packs come in a pack of 7, and then each stick pack is 1 serving. So really, this is initially formulated as a product. It was designed first to be a post-birth, so a postnatal product. But as we really got into looking at all the nutrients, I'm like, there's no way that this is only for women after they give birth. Like, really, it is designed to help handle stressful times, recovery from, overexertion. The fact that there are a combination of nutrients, like from the magnesium and zinc to support the immune system and things along those lines, to the potassium, the glycine, L-tyrosine, cranberry fruit, and then the probiotics. We put spore form probiotics in here as well to help heal the gut. And so all of these things together with vitamin D and protein and just the spirulina as a whole, it makes for a really incredible product. And this one is flavored with passion fruit and pineapple. It has a mild saltiness to it on the finish, and that also comes in part from the potassium citrate. So it's really, I think, an incredible product. I've even mixed this in my smoothies. So it's like I'll take my protein and all these other things, and it ends up being kind of a bluish pink in the end because of all the strawberries I put in there. Tastes delicious.
Oh, that's such a great point. I mean, it's delicious. People have associated spirulina with being a chore to take in the past, but
Jamba
because
juice, juice boost days, you know?
but this is the next generation of
Hmm.
microalgae, right? And
Hmm.
and because you have a tastier starting material that is grown in all those ways we've been talking about, sustainably, vertically integrated, it yields a better taste, or a taste that isn't strong and polarizing like microalgae have been in the past. When you put that in like the focus and memory gummies, we just did Whole Earth, we just did the America's Beauty show
Oh,
with
yeah.
Yield in Rosemont here in Chicagoland. And so we were talking to thousands of cosmetologists, beauty students, just average consumers that are not, let's say, quote unquote, health food shoppers. If there were a little group to put, those people in, it would be beauty professionals and associated consumer base. But with the gummies, I think it was really interesting to have people walk up and say, do you want to try this? And they say, well, some people ask, how do you get that green color? And when you tell them, oh, well, it's from microalgae, from spirulina, that's where the
Yeah, it's
green.
literally blue-green, which is why we had to choose flavors that went with green. So that's why we said green apple or green apple lime, even though there's all these berry flavors available to you. And you're like, it just sounds weird to have blackberry and then have it be green, like you expect
Green
something different.
blackberry.
It's a unique flavor. It tastes good. And what I love about this particular product over so many gummies out there is that you're getting a really active standalone dosage level of the nutrients that are in there, including the phosphatidylserine. That's the sharp PS, 100 milligrams of that, 100 milligrams of L-tyrosine. And these things work together to give you kind of calm, sustained mental clarity, which is really critical and important. And Sharp PS itself, in combination with that B12 from the spirulina, et cetera, is really shown over time to be more and more effective. So you get a stronger effect over time. And so far, people are really loving the product. The dosage is just 2 gummies, and it tastes good. So, it's not a lot to complain about.
Yeah, I think that's, making a product that actually tastes good where you're not sacrificing nutrition. I think with gummies, all too often we see products that have too much sugar, not enough actual therapeutic nutrient, and that's why they taste good. These
I
are
forgot to
actually,
mention the lion's mane.
oh
The
yeah,
lion's mane tastes good too, but this one has a standardized version of lion's mane. So it's the lion's mane mushroom extract, 200 milligrams. An extract is, of course, much more potent. Then it's standardized to beta glucans 1,3 and 1,6. So you're getting nutrients that also support your total body system, that are known to be nootropic, and ultimately an effective product. Yeah, and that's it. You want to produce effective products. So much of what is out there, especially in the gummy space, unless you're just getting some basic like vitamin C or B12, is, I kind of throw up my arms and go, okay, this is fortified candy. A lot of it. I mean, there's still sugars in this, but you're getting so much out of what you're putting into it that I just feel really confident in it. So it's just 4 grams of sugars, pectin based, vegan products. All of our products are vegan.
yeah, fantastic. I think that so much of what you're doing is really on point with the brand. I've seen a lot of great response, and I think that's really what you have to do in this day and age, is bring people a product that meets them where they are. In other words, it has to taste good, And if they're a more discerning consumer, in talking to folks, as I have quite a bit about the gummies, the phosphatidylserine is, you mentioned, a really important nootropic ingredient, but you don't see it as much. It was more like 20, 30 years ago,
It was
more
very
prevalent.
hot in the 90s and early 2000s, definitely. But, it's not that the science was bad. It's just, you have flavor of the minute, and lion's mane is more flavor of the minute, which is why we also included it.
Well, you don't have to choose, right? You
You
can
don't have
have
to choose. We did both.
you can have lion's mane and
Yeah.
phosphatidylserine and the Icelandic ultra spirulina and
Mhm.
all the broad spectrum of nutrition that comes with that. So they're really great formulations. I think not just having most companies that do um, grow ingredients in this vertically these verticals where they're pioneering technology, and there really aren't that many of them, right? So Voxa is kind of in a category that not that many companies are in, but to then also launch them using unique formulations that are innovative and speak to the market. I think it says a lot about what a great project this is, because you have, great ingredients, but also great formulations. And that to me really says the most about the brand.
Well, and if you're coming from that lens of sustainability, the product that you'll remember to take that does you the most good, that you're going to really enjoy and continue taking, that's also mindful of resources at the same time, like that's really the product you should be taking, not the one that just is going to sit on your counter and get dusty and take up space. And so many people, I think we have the best intentions. We go and we grab something and then we have it in our cabinets and we forget all about it, right? We've both spent money on it and then who knows if it's been consumed by the time it's starting to expire. So, if you have a product you enjoy taking, you're more likely to take it. That's where you get into these multiple types of, just different deliveries from a liquid to a gummy or something along those lines. And in the case of our immunity boost, a spray small enough to put in your purse, just a couple sprays twice a day. You're getting vitamin D, B12, and some other things along with the spirulina. And, they're because they're portable, because they're easy to take, it's easier to remember them. The omega 3s being in a beautiful glass jar that you then place on your shelf. I mean, you buy the pouch and you refill this. So we sell starter kits at retailers. We also sell them from our website. And then the refills can just be the standard pouches that you receive. This is the 4-pack packaged for retail, but a pouch made with post-consumer recycled plastics as opposed to something that's all virgin material. So we've really been mindful at every step of the way to try and reduce waste. Because when you think about the waste at the very beginning and you work to reduce it to a negligible level or use recycled or reusable materials, then the world that you'll build is going to be more sustainable even so. So it's really something that we think about at every step in our processing from our plants to what we do to bring products to market. We don't do a lot of printed materials. The printed materials we do make are ultimately for training purposes to bring into retailers like those that you are supplied with. And then also things like shelf talkers to help communicate the message. That really is the wave of the future. Less paper. Every single piece of paper is equivalent to 2 gallons of water in processing. You don't think about the water inputs, but fresh water is used to process paper, right? Beyond the tree. And then you have FSC certified forests or not certified forests. So it's just like there's so much that can go into this kind of lens of sustainability when you're bringing a product to market. And we really work to do the best we can. We're presently looking at whether we can come into an aluminum bottle. And so we're exploring that as well.
Wow.
And, that would shift us away from using a plastic on something like the gummies. And if we get to the point where we actually are replacing this refillable glass jar that's beautiful and perfectly preserves the oil to something that can be on the shelf, easier to grab for the retail marketplace, then we may go there. But again, looking at something like aluminum, which can be infinitely recyclable as opposed to plastic.
Yeah, from cradle to cradle, right?
From cradle to cradle, that's right.
Well, I really appreciate it, Karina. This is such an important product line to me, and I appreciate your taking the time and going through some of the products. I did just want to touch on just for a minute, it being Earth Day and
Mm.
everything, care more, be better. Can you just maybe tell us about a few of the recent guests you've had on that tackle this sustainability issue and some of the podcast of yours that they should check out?
Yeah, I've done so much specifically on sustainability as a topic from multiple lenses, whether it be from the fashion industry or regenerative agriculture, or even just looking at how we're building a sustainable future, even through things like creating art projects that help us to get that message out there. One episode that I'm super proud of is an interview with Donna Grantis, who was inspired by an earlier episode where I interviewed Donna Grantis on this podcast. She is an exceptional guitarist who trained with Prince. She was a musician who played guitar for him for some time. She's recently undertaken a project with Dave Grohl. She reached out to me because she was in particular impressed with an episode where I interviewed Tzeporah Berman of the Fossil Fuel Treaty and Stand.earth. And so she asked if she could use clips from my interview with Tzeporah Berman, which is spelled Berman, I think that's her last name. And she integrated that into a spoken word guitar solo that she launched at a Toronto music festival for Earth Day that year. So this is a slightly older episode. It's a couple years back, but it's one I'm super proud of. And she created this song that then ended up out in the world with projects including Brian Eno, and the exposure of that song then meant that dollars were being donated to earth-oriented projects along the way. So it just was something that was very fulfilling, because here I was doing something I was passionate about, talking about things like why we should cease having this drill baby drill perspective when it came to our earth. And then it ended up kind of spiraling into all of these particular spots that just, it really was seamlessly beautiful. Another a couple of interviews I've done that I think are just fantastic. I've interviewed Paul Hawken twice on my podcast. He just released a book called Carbon, the Book of Life, which was an incredible journey. I did an episode feature where I literally went through quotes in the book. I'd read the whole book and I essentially did a half-hour book report on it as a podcast, both audio and video. And then his interview was aired a couple of weeks later. And then because this is Earth Day, I should also mention that I interviewed Josh Tickle, who is the gentleman, the film producer, along with his wife, Rebecca, behind Kiss the Ground and Common Ground Films. And they are both available as of today for free on Amazon Prime. So if you haven't seen these films, Kiss the Ground and Common Ground, you should add them to your list and go watch them. It's the first time that they've been offered in that way. You could have seen Kiss the Ground before if you had a Netflix subscription, but this is just one more way that you can learn about regenerative agriculture, get to see some of your favorite actors and Hollywood producers, and really the people behind the scenes and in front of the scenes that are supporting a movement to bring carbon back to Earth and really start to move the needle and reverse climate change. Or reverse global warming, I should say. Climate change is constant, but reverse global warming.
Right. No, yeah, thank you for making that distinction.
There is one more initiative I undertook this year. I am planting a tree for every subscriber to the show. I'm doing this through forestplanet.org. So if you find Care More Be Better on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on YouTube, and you subscribe to the show there, I'm planting a tree in your honor. My intention is to continue planting trees through the end of the year with a goal of 20,000 trees. But I think I'm well ahead of that. So far to date, it's over 7,000. So my hope is to be able to hit that 20,000 mark by the end of summer.
Wow, that is fantastic. Well, I think that is a great sort of embodiment of the change that you are working to make and to encourage others to make. And I think, it's got to be so many things. I mean, the damage to the planet is not happening in a small little box, right? It's happening on many levels. So the fight to stem the tide of, like you said, global warming really has to be dynamic. It has to happen on many fronts. There have to be many conversations in many aspects of the world and of society. And you've done a lot to push the conversation forward, to disseminate the information, to work with products that are part of the solution. So thank you for all of that. And thank you for joining us on Whole Earth Radio to give people, a little some insights into what all you're doing and where it's going. And, we'll have you back on again. And I'm sure there'll be lots of new stuff to talk about then. But for today, happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. I'm so glad I was able to be here today. And I hope you just have an exceptional next year of the podcast. Season 3 is nothing to scoff at.
Thank you so much. Take care, Corinna.